Once again, I'm Sriqui23, and I'm here to once again show off my game collection. This should be episode 5. Here, I'm going to show off the games for my Atari 2600 system, otherwise known as the VCS. Now, the Atari VCS, or 2600 as it's more colloquially called, was released in 1977, and it was a very early second-generation video game system. This that I have here is this one that I have here is the 4-switch variant. You can see here it actually has a pair of difficulty switches up here, and what's cool about these is that you can actually toggle them independently for each player. Aside from that, you've got all these switches. They do things like, this is for the different types of TVs, whether color or black and white, because at the time not everyone had color TVs. This one is for game selection. Most games on the 2600, by hitting this, it would kind of flip through different options, because at the time there really were no in-game menus. You couldn't just do something like that. And this one's for game reset. Coming over here, I've got a bunch of peripherals and stuff for it. I keep in this drawer here. Here's your, first off, here is your standard Atari 2600 controller. It has a joystick and exactly one button. Now, I actually really don't like using this thing. I find it to be very awkward. Luckily, though, you can actually use a 3-button Sega Genesis controller with the Atari 2600, and it works great. I much prefer using that. Also, I've got a bunch of these controllers here, including this one that comes in the box. By the way, I forgot to mention this yesterday, but the Atari 2600 controller, and also by extension, the 3-button Sega Genesis controller, is also compatible with the VIC-20. Here, what these are paddle controllers. I actually really enjoy using these things. They come 2 for 1 plug. That's an HDMI cable. So you can actually have up to 4 players, and these things are really smooth and really nice to use. I really enjoy using them. Unfortunately, they have a tendency to break easily because they're very sensitive. But, yeah. I also have this thing. This is a keypad, and more specifically, this is for the game Star Raiders, because Star Raiders was originally an 8-bit computer game made by Atari, and obviously a computer has more buttons on a keyboard than the Atari does with its single buttons, so they kind of released this keypad to go with it, with this overlay that kind of tells you what everything does. Apparently there are some other games that can kind of use this, but yeah, but Star Raiders is the only one that I have at the moment. Now over here in this glass case here, I've got a bunch of boxed Atari games. These are really cool. It comes with everything inside of them. And that's actually very useful because, as I said, the Atari games didn't have really menus or anything like that, so if you wanted to know what all of the game types were and stuff like that, you kind of needed the manual. So here, I've got Asteroids, which is, of course, a port of the classic game. I've got Breakout Combat, which is the pack-in game for the system. I've got Golf is probably the worst game on the system that I've played, at least in my experience. Maybe I'm doing something wrong with it, but I seriously can't get a single hole. Haunted House was an early horror game. Pac-Man, which is rather infamous because it was pretty terrible. I've got Space Invaders, which that one came out in 1980, and it was based on the 1978 arcade game, and it was really a major system seller for the system, and it's one of the better games on it. I've got Yar's Revenge, which is really good, Warlords, Vanguard, the Star Wars Jedi Arena, stuff like that. Then over here, I've got some more loose ones. And what's really cool about Atari games is that you can sort of tell who made them based on sort of the design of the cartridge and the labels. Because at the time there really weren't any standards, and Atari couldn't really force different companies to conform to a single kind. So, for example, here, this one is an example of one made by Atari, and this is Adventure. And the Adventure was highly influential. It was one of the very first action adventure games ever made. These ones here with the triangular thing were made by Mattel, who also made their own Intellivision system at the time. And in fact, these things actually use part of the same plastic shell as their Intellivision cartridges, just with a bit at the end to make it fit inside an Atari. And these ones here were made by Imagic, which was a very good company at the time. Unfortunately, they were victims of the video game crash of 1983. They didn't last. Most of their IP rights were bought out by Activision. Speaking of which, these ones with the wraparound labels here were made by Activision. Activision was the very first third-party gaming company. They were originally a group of disgruntled Atari employees who were very much unsatisfied with the fact that they weren't being credited for any of their work, so they went off and founded their own companies, and it's definitely worked out well for them because they're now one of the biggest gaming companies in the world. At the time, they were very much known as sort of the masters of Atari 2600 programming, and it definitely is it's an accolade well deserved because they made many of the best games for the system. Like, I've got a bunch of these here. Like Berserk is actually really good. I don't think that one was released on later generation consoles. Choplifter is great. I've got a bunch of these by various companies. These ones in the beige cartridges were made by Coleco, who again was making their own ColecoVision console at the time. And yeah, I know it's kind of weird for a competitor to make games for a competing system, but they used to do that back then. And in fact, this Donkey Kong game was actually very infamous because what Coleco did is Donkey Kong was the pack-in game for their ColecoVision, so in order to emphasize how much better that system was, they kind of made the Atari version look much worse to kind of show, if you want to play the real version, you gotta buy a ColecoVision. Over here, I got more of them. Like, I've got this whole case here. I'm not sure if you can see all of them. These ones with the red labels here are late Atari 2600 games, because they kind of, like Solaris here and stuff like that, because what they did was, after the video game crash of 83 and after the NES was released, they still kept making Atari games, essentially as a budget system. Here I have, it's called a Zonox double, I just gotta move this out of the way. This is what's called a Zonox double ender. It's made by a company called Zonox, obviously, but the way it worked is that it's sort of a 2-in-1 where you'd plug in one for one game and then flip it around and plug in the other side for another game. Very cool. Dragster, which is actually, believe it or not, this is actually the very first game to incorporate speed running, because it was the first game to really feature sort of an in-game timer that challenged you to beat it as fast as possible. These ones here were made by CBS. Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back is actually a really good game. Let's see, I've got, I got a bunch of these things here. I got Spider-Man, which is one of the very first comic book games ever made. Sequest is surprisingly good. Oh, Pitfall and Pitfall 2 are both great games for the system, both very much ahead of their time. They, both of them, They were kind of early platform games, and Pitfall 2 especially, it came out in 1984, and it featured just a massive subterranean world that was fully open to explore. And I got this one called London Blitz, which is weird. It's made by Avalon Hill, who is probably best known for making historical war games. Kaboom is a lot of fun. That one uses the paddle, and it's one of those ones you can kind of go into a trance with it and sort of play it for hours. Got Frogger. This is a great port of the arcade classic. Frostbite, that's one of the better Activision games. Enduro is really cool. It's meant to be sort of a cross country sort of race. Yeah. I've got a few others here, like Raiders of the Lost Ark. That's an early sort of action-adventure game. And speaking of which, Riddle of the Sphinx is really cool. It's, because it's actually one of the very first... It's probably the first game I've ever seen that features any kind of morality system. Like, in that game you could kind of choose to do good or bad things, and you would sort of be punished accordingly if you did bad things. Very cool. In total, I have about 124 games for the Atari 2600. The total value of all the games is about $998. My most valuable game is London Blitz, which is worth about $25. Followed then by my complete in-box Pac-Man, which is worth about $22. And my third most valuable game is Pitfall 2, which is worth about $21. The system itself is worth about $50. The peripherals, in total, they're worth about $115. And in total, counting the system and all the games, it's worth the collection is worth about $1,160. Atari games are generally not worth all that much. I mostly have them sort of for the historical value, because I'm kind of a big gaming history nerd. They generally don't have much inherent value to them. Now, I guess I'll throw in a couple of other systems. Well, not systems, but sort of games I have for systems that I don't have. These are games for the Atari 7800. What that was Atari's sort of successor to the... get the glare out of there. It was their successor to the 2600, and it competed with the NES. It obviously did not succeed because... because obviously everyone knows what an NES is, but not a whole lot of people know what this is. And the reason why you might notice that these look very similar to Atari cartridges, that isn't to the 2600 cartridges, that's not a coincidence. It's actually because the Atari 7800 was actually the first system to feature backwards compatibility, so the cartridges had to be very much sort of shaped similarly. These things are worth about like $5 a piece. I do plan on eventually picking up an Atari 7800, but I got these ahead of time because I found them for like $1 a piece, so I figured why not. Lastly, I wanted to show the one Intellivision game I have. Now, the Intellivision was a system that made by Mattel that competed with the Atari 2600. This is the only game I have for it. It was like $2, and it's still partially sealed, and it's complete in box. It's nothing special, but I thought it would be neat. I do eventually plan to get an Intellivision, but I don't have one right now. But, I just thought that was cool. Okay, so that just about does it for today. Thank you very much for watching. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will catch you next time. Bye.